Welcome to the next in the series of our geography revision videos. This episode focuses on changing places and more specifically industrial change. The videos are brought to you by SRC Bede's Sixth Form Geography Department and they relate to the EDUCAS specification, which is the linear A level. The first part of this topic to understand is the Clark-Fisher model. The Clark-Fisher model is an important model of showing the changing balance of employment over time when looking at a national level. It distinguishes or breaks down four sectors of the economy: primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary. You can see it's broken down into two axes. The first axis shows the stage which it is at, which is pre-industrial, industrial and post-industrial, and the other axis shows the percentage of people in employment. In the pre-industrial phase, there is high primary employment, low but rising secondary employment and very low but rising tertiary employment. There is no quaternary sector. This is traditionally found in less economically developed countries. The next stage is the industrial phase. The industrial phase sees a large rise in the secondary sector and it peaking often at around about 45%. There is, however, a decline of the primary sector. The decline of the primary sector sees by the end of this phase primary employment dropping to 20%. The tertiary sector continues to rise. This is often found in newly industrialised but not fully developed countries. Finally, you have the post-industrial phase. This is found in the more economically developed countries and sees a still rising tertiary or service sector, but secondary and primary falling. Primary employment is now often less than 10%. There will be a rising quite rapidly quaternary sector, with this accounting for approximately 8% of the working population. Just to explain the sectors. The first sector that we have is the primary sector. The primary sector is involved with the collection and use of natural resources, so fishing, farming, mining, etc. The next sector shown at the bottom is the secondary sector. This is the manufacturing or industrial sector, the part that processes resources into goods that people want. The third sector, which is shown here, is the tertiary sector. This sector enables goods to be traded, often known as producer services, and it includes wholesaling, retailing, banking, finance, tourism and personal services. The final and most developed sector, only seen in the richest nations, is the quaternary sector, which involves research and development, the knowledge economy, including IT, education and the processing of information. One thing that you have to consider is that as you go through the Clark-Fisher model, the percentage balance within each country changes. So for example, if we were looking at the three countries shown on the chart, Ethiopia would be in the pre-industrial phase, China would be in the industrial phase, and the United Kingdom in the post-industrial phase. Using examples in this topic is very, very important. One example is the changes in the UK over the past 170 years. In 1841, 36% of the UK population were employed in manufacturing, but by 2011 this was as low as 9%. With regards to services, in 1841, 33% were employed in services. This is now 81%. The big decline in the primary sector can be seen with 22% employed in agriculture in the 1840s, but by 2011 this is 1% of the population. In 1841 the majority of people worked in manufacturing, closely followed by services. By 1881 the percentage of workers in services overtook those in manufacturing, and from 1861 the gap between services and manufacturing started to widen at its fastest rate. In 2011, over 8 in every 10 workers were in the service industry, with less than 1 in 10 within manufacturing. An important model which you need to understand is that of Kondratiev or Kondratiev waves. Both spellings are acceptable. They're another way of describing economic change over time. These Kondratiev waves are approximately 50 years in duration, and each of the past 4 waves, K1 to 4, has 4 phases. The 4 phases that you have, shown by the letters P, R, D and E, are prosperity, recession, depression and improvement. The model ignores primary production, so bear that in mind. Some of these waves will have affected the places that we are, and it particularly is the case in the Tees Valley in County Durham. The first Kondratiev wave in the UK occurred around 1800. You can see that this occurred when steam engine and cotton were developed. The next phase that developed was railway steel in 1850, followed by electrical and chemical engineering in 1900s, then the petrochemical industry in the 1950s, particularly evident on Teesside, and then information technology is developed in stage 5 in the 1990s. You can see that in each of the phases, as the Kondratiev wave goes through, prosperity is where there is a boom in that sector. There is then recession where money falls out of that sector, less is being invested. There is then depression where an area would be lacking services, there would be population issues, and then there is improvement where it starts to improve again. Some things to remember are that the UK can be related to the 5 stages of the Kondratiev waves very easily. An example of a place which we would be able to see evidence of stage 1 of the Kondratiev waves is in Manchester with the textiles industry. Another example of where we can see stage 2 would be Consett in County Durham. An example of where we can see stage 3 can be the likes of Birkenhead near Liverpool and Birmingham with the electrical and heavy engineering. The manufacture of plastics and petrochemicals leads us to a very local example, that of Billingham, and more specifically ICI. And finally, the 5th phase, the one which is currently developing and we'll see end in roughly 2040, is the IT and digital sector. And you can see that examples of this are Silicon Roundabout, Cambridge, the Menai Hub in Wales. One thing that we've got to remember is that there are a number of factors actually leading to the changes in the different sectors. One example is changing technology. So as technology changes over time, it can lead to a reduction or an increase in the amount of people employed in the sector. Another factor is globalisation. So as materials and the trading services goes between countries, this can lead to rise or fall. And another is government strategy. For example, when companies are privatised or nationalised. We have a number of examples which we need to understand. One example of industrial change is that of Redcar Steelworks. Redcar Steelworks was a long-running steelworks which had been on Teesside for over 100 years. It was previously owned by British Steel, then Tata, then the Thai company SSI. It was announced that they were going to mothball the plant, which effectively meant close it down. That led to the loss of 3,000 jobs for workers and contractors. The issue relating to this is not just the 3,000 jobs that are lost, but the 9,000 jobs which rely on the steelworks. Particularly as unemployment among men of working age in that area of Teesside is 10%. One issue that you have is that people working in the secondary sector often have careers for life in that sector and are unwilling to change. Therefore, once they leave that job, they find it very hard to work in a new sector. Another example of an approach to deal with the problems is to set up a Facebook campaign. Another one is European Regional Development Fund investment in the area to try and help upskill the workforce. The closing down of industry doesn't just affect the industries themselves, it can affect the retail and town centre. So for example, Marks and Spencer's, a well-known British retailer, pulled out of Redcar after 76 years, therefore closing down a large aspect of the town centre. Another example of where we had industrial change was that of Consett in County Durham. At its peak in the mid-1960s, the Consett Steelworks, run by British Steel, produced nearly 25 million tonnes of steel at 23 locations. But in the mid-1990s, production had actually decreased to 14 million tonnes at 4 locations. One of those locations was Consett. The steelworks that developed in concert were very much dependent on the ease of transportation of raw materials. As materials got harder to find, they had to close down some locations, including Concert. Concert was an area which began steelmaking in 1840, and at one point it produced 10% of the nation's steel. In 1980, the closure of Concert Steelworks was announced on economic grounds, so it wasn't making enough money. And the production was actually transferred to the more cost-efficient works on the coast at Redcas, the previously mentioned SSI Steelworks, which we use as a later case study. The raw materials had run out. This therefore meant a loss of 4,000 jobs and unemployment rising by 30% in the town. However, a positive outcome of this is Concert did not die as a town. After the steelworks had closed, there was both private and government investment into the area, and there was the setting up of the Derwentside Industrial Development Agency. It encouraged companies to move into the area. Some of these include Phileas Fogg Crisps, which is owned by Derwent Valleys Food, that employed 80 people, and Blue Ridge Care, a manufacturer of disposable nappies, which you will see on many shelves of UK supermarkets. In the units that exist around there, 200 companies, including some computer-based, have been established, actually creating 3,500 jobs. The economy in the area has diversified. However, one problem is that it lags behind in educational attainment. It is below both national and regional levels, with 18% and 40% of adults having low levels of literacy and numeracy respectively. The GCSE and A-level pass rates are 25% and 31% respectively. However, Concert as a town in the past 10 years does, however, start to face issues, as Durham Town Centre and its outlying retail areas such as the Arneson Centre and Dragonville and also the larger regional centre of the Metro Centre have led to decline. A third example of industrial decline that you can mention is that of Swansea. Swansea was another steel producing area, particularly one related industry was that of the copper works. It went through exactly the same problems as Concert and Redcar.